Hi, welcome back to Experimental Design and Statistics. This short video is going to cover the commands that we learned in Module 2. In Module 1, we learned some very general commands for describing data, things like sum or summarize, and tab or tabulate to describe both quantitative and categorical variables. And we also learned that by-sort command that's really handy for stratifying the data by levels of a categorical variable. In Module 2, we added a few more commands that are good for visualizing data sets, especially when they're new. For example, the codebook command was great for walking through a data set and for characterizing both the types of variables that are in the data set and the range and the specifics of the variables in the data. Tabstat command is a really useful command for creating summary tables, particularly ones that are appropriate for putting directly into reports, and I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. And graphing bar and pie charts is a great way to summarize and show your data graphically. So I've opened Stata, and of course the first thing that you're going to do when you open Stata is to open a log file, right? So in this case, I'm going to call this log file my Stata Module 2 PowerPoint. And I'm going to save it. And now we're going to open that McDonald's sandwich data set. So go over here, it's called McD sandwiches, and say open. Remember, when we first bring a data set into our screen, we might want to take a look at it with the editor or the browser. And as you can see, there are two fields that are alphanumeric, and we know that because they're written in red. We know that there's a bunch of fields over here that are numeric because they're in black. And there's a numeric field here that's been given labels, and we know that because the data are in blue. Another way we can figure out what kind of data we have in our data set is to run this command codebook. So I'm going just to type codebook for the entire data set. It ran super fast, and I'm going to scroll back up here to the top where the command began. And what I can see is that I have a variable called product. It's a string variable. There are 51 unique values, and codebook gives me some examples of the data that are in the variable product. I have another variable here called type. It's also a string variable. There are only 3 values. Here are the values in that particular variable, and there are 15 breakfast, 11 chicken, and 25 sandwich products. If I scroll down here to kcals, now I see that it's a numeric a numeric variable, and it's an integer, meaning that there are no variables with decimal places, no values with decimal places in them. It gives me the mean and the standard deviation. It tells me how many unique observations there are in kcals, and it also tells me how much missingness there is. If I scroll down a little bit further, I can find another numeric variable, saturated fat in grams. Now this variable says numeric double. That means there are values in this particular variable that have decimal places. So that's a slightly different kind of numeric data. And then if I scroll down here to the bottom, what codebook is really good for is, in particular, is variables that are categorical, like this variable cheese. Remember, we noticed that it was in blue. It tells me about the numeric values of the data that are associated with the labels. 0 equals no cheese and 1 equals cheese. So codebook is super handy for just exploring a data set when it's brand new to you. It's not a command you would run very often, but it's a useful command for just getting to know what kind of data are in your data set. The other new command, another new command that you learned in Module 2 is the command tabstat. So tabstat is actually for describing quantitative or continuous variables. So unlike tab, which is really meant for describing categorical variables, right? Tab or tabulate is meant for counting each level of a categorical variable. TabStat is meant for summarizing specific types of statistics for quantitative variables. So for example, if I type TabStat and I click on kcals and fat kcals and fat grams and sat fat grams, the default, if I don't add any other options, is just to give me the mean for all of those variables. And sometimes all I want to see is the mean. I'm either creating some kind of table, or I just need to know the means and how they compare for different kinds of variables. And so this is handy when I want to just kind of look at things. But TabStat is super useful for creating summary tables for papers, for example. So TabStat allows you to add an option called Stat or Statistics, and to specify the statistics that you want. So for example, I might want the total count, I might want the mean and the standard deviation, and I might also want the median. And I can specify that, and now when I return, it gives me those variables that I asked for, kcal, fat gram, and sat fat gram, and it tells me the total count, n, mean, standard deviation, and the median, or the 50th percentile. Maybe I don't want to put the data in exactly that format. So I also have the option in TabStat to specify which of the data are in columns and which of the data are in rows. So the default is to put the statistics in the rows, but if I add this option columns and type statistics, now my table includes all of the variables listed on the left, and then the particular statistics that I want are listed across as columns. Now this becomes super handy when I'm creating summary tables for papers. Now you were asked to run some TabStat statistics by some levels of a categorical variable. I can do that two ways. TabStat has a by option, and if I say by type, in this case, now it's giving me all of the variables that I asked for and the statistics that I asked for, and breaking those summary statistics down by breakfast products, chicken products, sandwich products, and by the total. So that is a super useful way to do that. But the only thing I don't like about the by option in TabStats is one, that you're limited to only one categorical variable, and two, that when you get the output, you've now lost the labels for the particular things that you asked for, and you have to go back up here and see what the different variables are. So another way to run that by command is by using your handy by sort command, by sort option. If I say by sort type, I can rerun that, and now I get the summary statistics for breakfast products, chicken products, and sandwich products. This becomes super useful when I want to create summary tables. For example, I can highlight this whole table, I can right click on it, and I can say copy the table. And then if I open Excel, I can actually copy that table directly into Excel, which I'm going to show you in just a second. And this becomes super useful for creating some summary tables in, I was trying to get Excel, summary tables for papers. So here's Excel, and I've copied that. I have to say copy table. I'm going to click right here and paste. Okay, and that top one was for breakfast food, so I'm going to type breakfast here. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to Stata, and I'm going to highlight the table for chicken products. I'm going to right click, say copy the table, and I'm going to click right here and paste. Okay, and this was for the chicken products. And then I'm going to go back to Stata again and copy that table. Right click, copy table, go back to go back to Excel and paste that table. So I did it all at one time on purpose because I wanted to be able to get rid of this row all at one time. So I'm just going to delete that row. And now, because I have the variable names off to the left, I can delete this column because I don't need it. And I can delete this column because I don't need it. And I forgot to add that these were sandwich products. And now, if I want to create a beautiful table for a paper, I can go back here, I can highlight these cells, right-click, Format Cells, Alignment, Merge Cells, and say OK. I'm going to do that for the chicken products. Format Cells, Alignment, Merge Cells, OK. And for the sandwich products, right-click, Format Cells, Alignment, Merge Cells, OK. Now, if I highlight all of these rows, I can center the data. I can highlight all of this. Oops, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to highlight this part. Right-click, Format Cells, go up here to Border, and say Outline and Inside and OK. And now I have a table. If I was doing some kind of report about McDonald's sandwiches, I have a perfectly good table that I could use to create my Table 1 Summary Description of McDonald's products. And that table is a perfectly good table that could be pasted into any paper. Pretty cool, huh? So I might want to take this beautiful descriptive table that I've created and start to paste it into my report on the McDonald's sandwiches. Kind of sounds like the final project that you're going to do in this class, right? So I can highlight these columns here. If I highlight all these columns in Excel, this is just an Excel trick, and if I get my cursor right to the side of the rightmost column, I can double click and it will automatically resize the columns to be the size of the smallest value in the columns. One thing I might also want to do before I take this table and put it in a paper is to make the numbers look a little bit nicer. I'm going to Format Cells, Number, going to go here and make the decimal places 2 and say OK. And now I'm going to go here and do the same thing. Right click, Format Cells, Number, oops, cancel. I lost my Format Cells, Number 2, say OK. And then I'm going to go here and highlight these. Right click, Format Cells, Number, 2 decimal places. Okay, and now that looks a little bit better. So there's my table, and I can take this table straight out of Excel, copy it. I'm just going to do a copy. Right click. I can do a copy here. I think I already copied with the keyboard. Copy, and I can open up Word, and here's my first part of my report. Molly's McDonald's report, which is a really corny name for my report, but I'm just going to leave it like that for now. And I'm going to paste that table in there, and now I have the very first element of my report. So I might go here and center it, the title in bold, and obviously that's not going to be the very first thing in my report, but I can put it there as a placeholder. Now, maybe I want to include some graphics in this report. So I'm going to go back over here to Stata, choose the bar chart graphics, and maybe I'm going to create a graphics of some of those variables that we just talked about. When you open bar chart, the default is graphing summary statistics, and the default statistic is the mean. I can choose kcals. I can choose here, I can click on fat kcals, and I can click on fat grams. These are the things we summarized in that table, and I can click on saturated fat grams, just like we summarized in our table. If I click here on the Submit button, it creates that graph. And well, maybe grams and kcals don't look so great on the same graphic, so I might want to break that up into two graphs. So I'm going to close that window and I'm going to unclick these two and say submit. And there's my total kcals and fat kcals. Kind of interesting, but now I want to make that bar graph by a certain category. So I'm going to go back over here to the bar chart screen, click on categories, click here on the grouping variable, and I'm going to say, give me those two variables graphed by the type of product. If I say submit, now that graph looks a little bit different and maybe a little bit more interesting. Here's the fat kcals and the total kcals for breakfast products, chicken products, and sandwich products. So that's kind of interesting. I can actually graph by two levels of the data. If I wanted to see what it looked like, whether or not the, the product had cheese in it, I could choose cheese here, say submit, and now I have all of the products over here with no cheese and all of the products here with cheese. And as you can see, there aren't any chicken products with cheese. So that looks kind of weird. I don't know if I would actually put that graph in a paper. So I'm going to click off of that. I'm going to unclick my grouping variable and I'm going to submit that graphing command again. Now there's a couple of different ways once I've created a graph to edit it. I can go here, File, Graph Editor, and the graph editor lets me open up parts of the graph and click on them and modify them. So if I open up bar region and I double click on bar 1, that's going to take that navy bar and change it however I want to change it. So I might want to change the color. I can change the color to olive green. I can change whether or not there's a different colored line outside of the bar. So for example, I want the different color line and it's going to be, let's make it something bright so you can see it, orange. I don't know how that's going to look. Maybe not very pretty, but there you go. There's now my olive green with orange outline, which is not all that beautiful, right? So maybe I want to go back, and the nice thing is I can keep the editor open and I can make these changes and apply them, decide whether or not I like them, and then make the changes appropriately. So how about if I choose a nicer color, maybe khaki? And I go back to not changing the outline as a different color and say apply. And now that graph is not amazing, but it looks kind of okay. And now when I'm done with changing the bar properties, I can click off and just say okay. Maybe I want to add a title. I can double click here on title and I can say kcals in McDonald's products. I can change the size of the text. I can change the color of the text. I can change the margins. If I say apply, there's my beautiful title for my graph. Say OK. Now maybe I want to change properties about the scale. So here, because this is a categorical graph, I only get options to change properties about the y-axis here. So I can change the scale itself, so whether or not it's logarithmic or whether or not it's numeric. Don't really want to change that, so I'm going to say cancel. I can add things like the axis line. I can change whether or not it's thin or thick, and the color and the look of it. If I said I want it to be medium thick, I can apply. Do I like that? It's only changing one axis line, so it looks kind of weird, so I'm going to say cancel. And let's see, change that back to none. Say apply. Whoops, that's none. I'm just going to change it back to thin, which I think is what it was before. Apply. Okay, so I can say OK there. I might want to add an axis title, right? So here's the title option, and I can call it kcals because it's fat kcals and total kcals. Apply, OK, and there's my nice little title there. So I can change lots of things about the graph, and it's really fun to kind of play around with the different aspects of the graph that can be changed. Once I get the graph looking like I want to be sure and save that graph. So I'm going to save this graph as the McDonald's kcals figure. Say save. I've already created one, so I'm going to save over that one. And now I can also, I still have the data to editor open, so I might want to close the data editor. So stop the data editor. So that just closes that editing screen. And when I'm out of the data editor, I can actually right click on this graph and copy it. And I can take it directly back over to my Word document and I can paste it. So I can right click and say paste, and there's my graph right there in my report. So I'm ready to rock and roll and create this amazing report all about McDonald's sandwiches. So there's another type of graph we can create, and this was part of your Module 2 assignment. So we can go back over here and create a pie graph. So if I go Graphics, Pie Chart, and now maybe I want to just count up how many items are in each of those product categories. So I click on Type and Submit, and there's my graph, and it shows me how many products are in each of those categories. Maybe I want to add another level of the graphics where I say I want to graph the number of products in each of those categories by whether or not they have cheese in them. So I can add this cheese variable here and say submit, and now I get two pie charts. And as we saw earlier, here are the products with cheese and the products without, the products without cheese and the products with cheese, and we said there were no chicken products with cheese because they're mostly chicken nuggets. So here's my nice little graphic. Again, I can open the graph editor and I can add things like a title, which I might want to do. McDonald's products by cheese status. It's a funny thing to put, but I'm just going to put it like that for now and say OK. And then there's my little graph. Again, I can save that graph. I'm going to save this as my McDonald's pie chart. Save. Yes. And then again, just like before, here I'm in the editor. If I'm in the editor, I can see these options here. So I can click out of the editor like this, or I can say close the editor, stop the graph editor, and here I've got my graph, and again I can right click on it and copy it, and I can put it into my Word document. Scroll down in my Word document and paste. I'll go down to the next page and paste that, and there's my second graphic. One more thing to note about Stata graphics is that every time you use that graphics editor screen up at the top, it's actually also creating Stata code that creates your graphics. And sometimes it's actually easier to just highlight the code. I'm copying that code and pasting it here. And I can actually use that code. I can change kcals now to maybe fat grams, and fat kcals to my sat fat grams. And I might want to do that again over type, and I can just click return. And now instead of having to go all the way through the data editor or the graph editor, I can actually just use the code to create the graph. If you know the code, typing code to me is always easier than using the point-click versions of things. But if you don't know the code, it's a really great feature that you can point and click almost everything in Stata. One last thing to note about Stata graphics is that when you create them, of course you can save them, and the default file format is a .gph file. Those are graphics files that can only be read by Stata. But you also have the option of saving them in other formats like enhanced meta files or Windows meta files, PNG and TIFF files, and those are file types that can be read in other programs like Word and Notepad and any kind of text editor. So if I save this file as a .tiff file, and I've already saved this one, so I'm just going to save over that file that I had already created, now I can go and navigate to my report And maybe I'm not ready to cut and paste directly out of Stata, but I can save that file, and when I'm ready to insert it into my report, if I've saved it as a TIFF or a more generic file format, I can go Insert, Picture, I can navigate to where I saved that file and click on it, and then I just say Insert. So that's another way I can either copy and paste graphics directly from Stata to my Word document, or I can save them in a general format and insert them later. So in summary, we've covered a lot of commands that can be used to summarize data. The tab command counts numbers of observations in a categorical variable. The sum command summarizes continuous variables. By sort can be used to run almost any command, stratifying by levels of one or more categorical variables. Codebook is used to characterize a dataset in general, in particular when the dataset is new. TabStat can be used to create summary tables for papers. Graphs can be made with the graphics editor or by writing the code if you know the code. And all of the output from Stata can be used to create components of your report.